Throughout history, animal fats have been the main ingredient in skincare practices. And then we decided to change it up by swapping these out for things like synthetic chemicals and alcohol. And needless to say, we are realizing that like in so many things, our ancestors definitely had it right. But when it comes to natural skincare, how do you get started? The first important step is rendering your animal fat, tallow in this case, so that it is purified and odorless. You don't want to walk around smelling like beef. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well as share our natural skincare routine. Why would you want to use animal fats and specifically tallow on your skin? So tallow is full of the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K and is highly compatible with skin. It has natural anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial benefits, as well as providing the skin with a strong protective barrier and helping to repair and heal skin. So basically, once we started using it for ourselves, there was no going back. So the first step in making tallow skincare products is to render your own tallow. So tallow is basically the word for rendered beef fat. So when you go to the butcher or a local farm and you ask them for beef fat, they likely will call it suet. So suet is beef fat. So you're going to take your suet and that is what you are going to render to get tallow. There are two different methods for rendering tallow, the wet method or the dry method. So the dry method is simply taking your suet or the beef fat and heating that up until it all melts and using that. And you could do that for skincare products, but if you cook it that way, it is likely going to have that pretty strong beefy smell. When you cook the fat just straight on the stove or in a crock pot without adding anything, it's easy for it to get burned a little bit and just create that really beefy smell. So this is the way that we render tallow to use for cooking. But when we are making skincare products with our tallow, I like to render it using the wet method. So the wet method is where you're gonna render your tallow by adding some water and salt. And what the water and salt is gonna do is it's going to keep the tallow from burning, which is going to give it more of that beefy smell, but it's also going to remove impurities from the fat, which is going to remove any of those smells, get all of that stuff out, to have the end result being a really pure tallow that doesn't have any sort of beefy smell. To get started, you're going to want your suet. And so I got this, it's already chopped suet. This was actually beef fat from our cow that we raised here on our farm. So she was 100% grass-fed, grass-finished cow. And when we took her to the butcher, of course, we ask for everything. We want to get everything back from that cow that we raised. And so they had already chopped this suet up for us. And so when you go to the butcher or your local farmer to get suet, it's a lot easier to use if it's pre-chopped, or even ideally they might grind it up for you in really small, fine pieces. That would be ideal for rendering. So this is already pre-chopped. Some of these pieces are a little bit on the larger side, but I'm gonna go ahead and take all of this suet and I'm gonna throw it in my crock pot. So I have about 5 pounds of suet here that I'm working with today, and that fills my crock pot up. And so I'm gonna throw those in along with about 6 to 7 cups of water and about 3 tablespoons of salt. We're gonna get all that mixed up, and what I'm doing here is starting it at night before I go to bed, so that way I can have it be slow cooking on low all night, and then in the morning it will be ready to do the next step. So first thing when I got up the next morning, I'm gonna turn my crock pot off and just let it cool down for a couple hours while I am kind of doing our normal morning routine before I have a chance to get back to it, so that when I come back, the crock pot has the chance to cool down and is gonna be a lot easier to work with. The first step here is that you want to strain your tallow. So the setup that I'm using is taking a large stock pot with the metal strainer insert, and then I'm lining the strainer with a cheesecloth. Now you can create whatever setup you want. If you have a fine mesh strainer, you can use that and place it on top of a bowl with cheesecloth or whatever systems you have in order to basically strain the chunks of tallow that are left out of the liquid that you want to keep. Now you want to avoid making a huge mess and spilling this tallow all over your counter or your sink. So I have found it just easier and safer to take a liquid measuring cup and scoop out several cups of the tallow and pour that into my strainer as opposed to just pouring it. I've had too many instances of making a mess. So I find this to be just a safer, easier route to go. So you're gonna wanna scoop all of that tallow into your mesh strainer and then strain the tallow down into a bowl or some sort of stock pot or something to collect all of that tallow and water. If the tallow that you are using was shredded, it might be easier to get even more of the tallow from this. Ours was in chunks and I feel like there is still quite a bit of pieces of tallow here, but that's okay. We're gonna strain it. I'm kind of squeezing with the cheesecloth and just trying to get as much of that good tallow out as I can. And then actually with the extra just fat that we have here, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna bring that out and give it to our chickens. I wouldn't recommend giving fat like this to our chickens every day, but it is a healthy treat for them. They are loving it. And so it's just a good way to nourish them, put it to use, and for us to get it out of our house. Once I have strained the tallow in the water into my stock pot or your large bowl or whatever you're using, you're gonna wanna put this in the fridge. And what's gonna happen here is that your tallow is going to separate from your water. So put it in the fridge for a good couple of hours and let this happen. While our tallow is chilling in the fridge and solidifying, I'm gonna go ahead and we had just a little bit of tallow left from the previous batch of tallow that we rendered, and so I'm going to turn that into tallow balm. And tallow balm is one of our favorite skincare products. It's actually basically the main thing that we use for all of our moisturizing needs or lotion needs. Anytime we have dry skin or even diaper rash for babies, anything that needs just a moisturizer, healing skin, tallow balm is my go-to thing. We use this for everything. It is so moisturizing and it is so easy to make. So to make tallow balm, all you're gonna do is melt about a half a cup of tallow, and you can scale this recipe to make however big of quantities you want, but I'm gonna melt this half cup of tallow, and then you're just gonna add 2 tablespoons of olive oil to the tallow. It's important to add a liquid fat to the tallow because tallow is a solid at room temperature. And so if you add something like coconut oil, which is also a solid at room temperature, or just use tallow, you're gonna have a really hard fat basically that is not spreadable to use on your skin. But when you add olive oil, or you could use avocado oil or something that's a liquid and add that to the tallow, it gives the tallow balm this really easy to spread, kind of creamy texture that makes just the perfect moisturizing lotion. If you want to get fancy, you could take an immersion blender and you could turn this into whipped tallow balm to make it kind of more lighter, fluffier, more luxurious. I usually just leave it in this easy tallow balm. I find that it just stores better and is better for us to use long term, but you could do either. When it comes to our natural skincare routine, tallow really is like the base of all of the recipes and things that we use for our skin. And I kind of laugh when I say that I'm going to be telling you about our skincare routine because, guys, it is like as bare bones and basic as it gets. It's like hardly even a routine because we really just don't put a ton on our skin, to be honest with you. For our shampoo and soap, we have our tallow shampoo bar that we love. I have a video tutorial and a post on how to make that I can link below, but it is so good for hair, for cleaning your hair. I have tried everything under the sun when it comes to natural shampoos, and this tallow shampoo bar has just been by far our favorite. So that's what we use for both shampoo, cleaning our hair, and for body soap. And then, like I said, we have our tallow balm, which is like our all-purpose moisturizer. I use that for even a lip balm. I use it for a diaper balm for babies' bottoms. And you could play around with these recipes. You could add different essential oils or different things if you want to kind of use them for different purposes. But I just do the basic tallow and olive oil, and then it's just multi-purpose and I can use it for everything. Besides our tallow balm and our shampoo bars and body soap bars, we also make a tallow-based deodorant. And then every spring, I like to make some more specialized things that we have on hand for the spring and summer months. So we do a tallow-based sunscreen, so that's pretty self-explanatory, as well as a tallow-based drying salve. And a drying salve is kind of this ancient remedy, but it has ingredients in it like bentonite clay that are used for drawing toxins out of the skin. And so I like to have a batch of this ready for tick season, for bee season, for just being ready for the inevitable stings and things that come with these summer months. And so the drying salve is great for drying out those toxins and just providing a lot of relief for those stings and bites. Another one of our favorite tallow skincare products is we make a magnesium lotion. And so this is one of my favorite things to put on. I always put it on like our feet before we go to bed at night. Magnesium is really good for promoting good sleep and something that a lot of people are really deficient in. And so just adding a little bit topically in this lotion is a great way to add a little bit. And I found that it really helps to boost sleep and just to help especially our kids get a good night's sleep. So I like to have magnesium lotion that we'll use. I like to put it on your feet because then I can rub it in, put socks on over it, and I don't have to worry about grease stains on sheets and things like that. And to be totally honest with you, that is kind of the extent of our natural skincare routine. I kind of feel funny saying this, but I have never worn makeup really ever in my life. My mom never wore makeup, and it was just not a thing that we did. Not that she told us we couldn't or anything like that. We just never did. And I just really always appreciated and admired her natural beauty. And so I just followed in those footsteps. And so it's just never been a thing that we have done. And so we don't have any makeup in our house. It's just not something I use. But the cool thing is now there are so many better natural even makeup options. I know Toups & Co is a popular one, and there's other natural makeup options if you want to add that to your skincare routine as well. All right, so now our tallow has had a chance to get hardened and solidify in the fridge. So we're gonna go ahead and pull that out. And actually taking the tallow out of your bowl or stock pot or whatever you put it in can be a little bit tricky. I've had to play around with it here, trying a couple different methods, but what I'm gonna end up doing is taking it to the sink and kind of working at it a little bit. You wanna get the water to come out, and then once the water comes out, it kind of works that disc that forms, that tallow disc that forms to be the shape of your container, to kind of work itself out. So you kind of have to play with it a little bit to get it to come out, but if you can work the edges a little bit, get the water to pour out, then eventually the disc will come free, and then you have your disc of tallow. And so you want to take that out and look at the top is going to be really nice and shiny and beautiful, but you want to flip it over to the other side, and that's where you're going to see where the salt has really drawn out the impurities in your tallow. And so this one actually looks really, really beautiful here. Sometimes I've made tallow and there's almost like a gray layer there where the salt has pulled out some just impurities and toxins and things like that. And so you want to go ahead and scrape that layer off. In this case, it really looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and scrape some of this kind of just more gritty top layer part off so that you want just a nice smooth, clean surface. But overall, this looks pretty good. So just scrape off that kind of gritty layer until the whole disc is kind of just that pure, smooth, white tallow. And then after you've scraped that layer off, you're just gonna repeat the process again. So I'm gonna cut this tallow disc into chunks, into small chunks. I'm gonna put it back into my crock pot, and then I'm gonna add more water and more salt. This time around, I am adding about 4 cups of water, not as much as I added before, and then I'm doing another 2 to 3 tablespoons of salt. You're gonna heat that on low. You don't need to do it as long this time. I'm just doing it until everything in the crock pot has melted, so just a couple of hours. We're gonna take advantage of the opportunity while our tallow is melting. It's actually the solar eclipse where we are today, so we're gonna head outside. We're gonna enjoy watching the solar eclipse for the next hour or two while this is melting, and then we're gonna come back and we'll finish straining it off. 2:07 I saw was like the peak time. It's much easier to strain the second time around. You don't have all of those little chunks of tallow that you need to worry about. You already have just a pure, clean tallow. So again, if you think of it and you can unplug your crock pot an hour or so before you want to strain, it just makes it a lot easier. But this time around is so much smoother. I just set up the same system with my stock pot and the strainer and a cheesecloth, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and pour straight from the crock pot this time into that strainer in case there are any chunks or any impurities that need to come out. But just pour that back into my stock pot and then put the stock pot back into the fridge. After it's been in the fridge for a couple of hours, I'm gonna take it out and I'm gonna do that process again of pulling that disc of tallow out and straining out the water. And as you can see now, it looks so good on top. There's really hardly any of those impurities, that gritty stuff that I need to scrape off, maybe just in a few small sections here. So I'm gonna go ahead and scrape those off, but this is a beautiful disc of tallow and this is gonna be ready to go. Now, depending on what your tallow is looking like, and if you're still having a lot of that grittiness and those impurities, you can go ahead and repeat this process a few more times until you get that really nice, pure tallow. It just is gonna kind of depend on what you're working with. So for us, 2 times is fine, but you might find that you have to do it more like 3 or 4 times, just that process of adding water and adding salt, straining it, and then refrigerating it and scraping off any of that stuff that needs to be taken off. And the more times that you do it, it's gonna help to eliminate any beefy smells that might be in it. So with 2 times, I can maybe still smell a slight odor, but it's not bad at all. But if you do it a few more times, you can really eliminate any odors that might be there. Once I have my finished tallow, I'm just gonna take it, and you could store it like this in kind of this firm chunk, but I just find it easier to store in mason jars. So I'm gonna cut it up into chunks and I'm gonna put it in a stock pot. The big thing here that you wanna keep in mind is that when you separated the tallow from the water in your bowl or in your stock pot, you wanna make sure when you are storing the tallow long term that it doesn't have any water stored with it, because if there's water stored with the tallow, it could cause it to mold as it sits there over time. So you wanna make sure, I'm gonna take a paper towel and kind of blot off any excess moisture that I see here. So you wanna just make sure you're being conscious of eliminating any water that could have gotten in there. But I'm gonna take my tallow, I'm gonna cut it into chunks, and I'm going to melt it on the stove. And this is just so I can pour it then into mason jars to store long term. I like to store my tallow in the fridge. I usually use it over the course of the next few months, and so I've just found it is safe in the fridge. It's gonna stay good for a really long time in the fridge or in the freezer. It will store fine on the counter, like in a pantry at room temperature for a couple months, but I just rather be safe than sorry, and it doesn't take up that much room, and so I just store it in the fridge. So when it comes to making your own homemade natural skincare products, I think it can be really intimidating up front and even just feel like a huge investment of cost to get all of these different ingredients to make your own skincare stuff. But I promise that once you get started and once you get used to kind of adding these things into your regular repertoires and rhythms, it gets so much easier over time. And then the beauty of kind of having that upfront investment in buying some of these ingredients is that that's gonna make so many batches of the thing that you wanna make. So while it might seem like an upfront cost, it really does result in a lot of savings over time. And so we have loved kind of starting making one thing and then slowly adding another thing and another thing and another thing to where we now can basically cover all of our skincare needs. And so making that tallow, rendering that tallow is just such a base for so many other recipes. So if you can render your own tallow, you can make so many skincare products.